Welcome to Vibecast.
Yo, what is up, everybody, and welcome to the one and only Vibecast. This podcast exists for this one academic moment because it's tied directly to our final grades. So, no pressure at all. Today, we're talking about the film Black Panther through an anthropological lens, as it is directly associated with our sociology class here at Acadia University. We'll start with a very quick summary of the film and then how it's connected to some of the course concepts that we've discussed, and then we'll move right into our own personal analyses. And then finally, the group decided that we want to go ahead and bring this very, very, very cool, Reddit style question and answer to the table. So we're going to go ahead and break into that in a couple of minutes. But first, I'm Mikhail Willis, your host for today, and I'll be talking about food and its cultural role in the film.
Hey guys, my name is Sky, and I'm going to be talking about race and ethnicity.
And hey, I'm Hallie, and I'll be analyzing gender and sexuality.
So to start us off, here's a very quick overview about the film. Black Panther follows T'Challa as he returns to Wakanda to become king after his father dies. Wakanda is a super advanced nation, but is also deeply connected to tradition and cultural identity. As the story goes on, T'Challa is challenged by another Wakandan named Eric Killmonger, who actually grew up in California, and there's a very crazy family dynamic that's there that we'll dive into, but very important, keep that in mind. Because they grew up very differently, this leads to a very major conflict about how Wakanda should use its power and interact with the rest of the world.
And from an anthropological viewpoint, this is what makes the film interesting. It just doesn't just tell a story, it shows how a society is built through culture.
Exactly, and we can see how things like identity, generals, and even power are shaped by the shared beliefs in Wakanda.
And that also goes for even everyday actions, along with the bigger traditions that all keep the structure and just pretty much show what is the true meaning of how a society works.
So instead of just focusing on the plot line, we're going to look at what's underneath, how the system really works.
And we'll also be touching on how that connects to what we've been learning in class.
So with that in mind, we're going to start off with our first focus. Sky is going to go ahead and take you guys on the journey into what is race and ethnicity and how this shows, and how, sorry, it shows up in the film.
So when we look at race and ethnicity in the film of Black Panther, it shows how Wakanda is such a small but proud nation, where advanced technology is deeply connected to African culture and identity. From an anthropological view, race is not actually biological. It is something created that we have created within our minds and society, but it is not directly connected or created to genetics. Even though race is biological, it still has real effects, especially in how identity, power, and view and culture are expressed. This is where ethnicity becomes extremely important, because it's based on shared culture, traditions, identity, rather than physical traits. In Wakanda, we see strong pride. The nation is made up of 5 different tribes, and each one adds to the history and traditions. Everything is closely connected to the land, which strengthens that identity. The film also shows that culture and progress can exist together simultaneously, instead of being separate. One key way identity is shown is through cultural markers, like the lip engravings used in Wakanda. These markings show if someone belongs and acts as a visual sign of identity. This connects to real African practices, where body modification represents culture roles and heritage. So this raises an important question. How do these lip engravings enforce identity and help reclaim and preserve African heritage? In the film, they act as a shared symbol of belonging so that people can recognize them. This shows that identity is not just personal, it also shows that it is visible to others within a society. We can see this clearly within the movie Black Panther because within one scene, there is how Killmonger challenges for the throne. Even though he hasn't been raised in Wakanda, as we've explained, he grew up in California, he is allowed to challenge because he is the son of Prince Njobu, which means he has royal blood. But since he grew up outside of Wakanda, his identity is questioned. He has to prove who he is by showing his family connection before he is accepted. This shows that identity in Wakanda is not just about blood, but it's also about recognition from others. At the same time, these cultural markers challenge Western beauty standards and colonial ideas that once viewed African practices as extremely negative. Instead, they are shown as symbols of pride, strength, and identity. They help reclaim and preserve African heritage by keeping traditions alive across generations. Overall, the lip engravings show that race and ethnicity are not just about physical traits, but about culture, shared history, and identity. They also show how these things shape belonging within one society. And while identity in Wakanda is strongly shaped by culture and ethnicity, it is influenced by gender roles and expectations.
Thank you, Sky. Those are really good points. So now looking at gender and sexuality in Black Panther, the film actually gives us a really different perspective from what we're usually used to seeing in Western media. So, from kind of an anthropological point of view, gender is not just biological, but it's really strongly shaped by society, which means the different cultures have very different expectations for how people should be acting. So, Wakanda is a really strong example of this because it challenges a lot of those expectations. And one of the biggest things that we see is that women hold really powerful roles in the film. So, Shuri, T'Challa's sister, is like a tech genius. She runs a lot of technology. She manages a lot of technological advancements in Wakanda. Okoye is the general. She's one of the top soldiers, and Nakia is a really skilled spy and moral voice, and Ramonda is the queen. So instead of being in the background, women are actually leading and shaping the future of Wakanda. So this is actually this is even more clear with the Warriors, sorry, where the strongest fighters for T'Challa are women, especially the Dora Milaje, while many who support Killmonger, who is the villain, are men. So this actually challenges a lot of Western ideas that men are dominant fighters. So the Dora Milaje are also really important because they aren't sexualized at all. Their identity is based on loyalty, skill, and honor rather than appearance, which is very different from how women are often shown in Western films, especially in Hollywood. So the film also kind of explores masculinity through T'Challa and Killmonger, where T'Challa represents a really calm, fair, kind of democratic, emotionally aware leader who listens to others and doesn't at all rely on aggression or violence, while Killmonger kind of represents a more toxic, aggressive, dominance-based version of masculinity, which is a lot more common in Western societies. So, through showing both of these perspectives, the film kind of challenges the idea that power has to come from aggression, especially when it comes to men. And another point is kind of how the film handles relationships. So, since romance isn't a main focus, there's no major relationship plotline, and the only clear romantic moment is at the end when T'Challa and Nakia kiss. But it's still very quick and not a major point. So, instead, the film focuses more on leadership, responsibility, and identity, which challenges Western norms where romance is usually a really central moment, especially when women are key characters in the film. So, this raises the question of how Black Panther challenges ideas of gender and sexuality and what this says about Western norms. So, overall, the film does this by redefining masculinity through T'Challa and presenting strong female characters in positions of power and shifting focus away from romance to highlight identity and leadership. So, in the end, the film kind of shows that gender roles are shaped by culture, and Wakanda presents a society where power and identity are not limited by traditional gender norms, especially in Western society. And this also connects to other systems of society, especially food and access to resources.
So shifting into food, one of the most important elements in Black Panther is actually the heart-shaped herb. From an anthropological perspective, food isn't just about survival, it's actually tied to culture, belief systems, and even social structures. We see this clearly happening in Wakanda, where the heart-shaped herb is not everyday food, but is actually a sacred controlled resource connected to leadership, identity, and even tradition. It grows in a vibranium-rich soil, which originally comes from a meteor that originally struck Wakanda. And this is what gives the land its unique nutrients and properties. Because of this, the herb is not just connected to the environment, but to Wakanda's origin and identity itself. This also connects back to what Sky was talking about in her section, where we saw how identity in Wakanda is deeply rooted in the land, culture, and shared history. The access to vibranium as a natural resource helps shape Wakanda's cultural and social systems, just like how a herb does, or just like the herb does, sorry. Uh, it is only consumed by the person who becomes king or queen during the ceremony, where the new ruler takes the herb to enhance their physical abilities and allow them to enter the ancestral plane, connecting with past leaders. This makes the act of eating a ritual where food connects the physical and spiritual world, which is very interesting. A little bit of foreshadowing to our Reddit section, or sorry, our special section to be coming. Um, Access to the herb is also restricted to the royal line, showing how food is directly tied to power and hierarchy, since it determines who can actually rule. This raises a very important question. There's a certain scene in Black Panther where Killmonger actually orders to go ahead and destroy all of the gardens that actually is growing the heart-shaped herbs. So the question is, how does Killmonger's destruction of the heart-shaped herb reflect ideas about food systems and control resources? When Killmonger burns the herb, he is not just destroying a plant, but he's actually removing the access to the power and preventing future leaders from gaining legitimacy. And in anthropological terms, he takes a control and tradition-based systems and turns it into one where power is completely monopolized. And at the same time, because the herb is connected to leaders, it pretty much cuts off that ancestral plane connection, which is very important in Wakandan culture and history. So destroying it also cuts off that spiritual link, disrupting both leadership and cultural identity. Overall, the heart-shaped herb also just shows that food can be much more than nourishment. It pretty much just connects environment, belief, power, and identity within a society. Okay, now we are moving into our interesting section that we wanted to go ahead and bring to the table. So I kind of mentioned this whole idea of rituals and also the connection to the spiritual plane. What we thought was very big was this concept of supernaturalism. It's a concept that we didn't really get to fully focus on in class, so we had to do a little bit of just some self-identifying and self-connections with trying to, sorry, understand the concept. So pretty much this next part, we wanted to switch things up a little bit. We went through a Wakanda subreddit and found some very few interesting questions that people were asking about supernaturalism, specifically around rituals in Black Panther. And now the reason why we really think this is important is because it connected very well to some of the things that we've been discussing. Because in Black Panther, these rituals aren't just tradition, they connect to the physical world, uh, something that's more spiritual. So we're going to take a break and pretty much break down these concepts instead of pretty much tying in our own personal analysis over it, if that makes sense. And before I start, I do want to say for this section, because it is kind of just diverse, it's very just out there. We do have our own personal notes to kind of keep us online. So if we're looking around or even being stumbled, it's not because we're just going off. It's a podcast. We have to have our notes to just kind of allow us to be tangible because we don't want to go all over the place. Sorry, not to be tangible. We just want to be direct. So just having that as a note. So the first question comes from a user named Yowani Mikolas, which I think is very interesting because I believe that's the guy from our class. Is it not, you guys?
I
I
think it
think
is.
so.
Yeah, I think that is Yowani because,
Yeah.
anyways, Yowani asks, how does this ritual combat in Wakanda actually legitimize authority? Like, why does fighting for the throne make someone a rightful king? Now, that's a very interesting and strong question because it gets the idea that leadership isn't just about power, it's about whether people recognize that power is legitimate or not. In Wakanda, ritual combat is what gives the legitimacy. According to what we've learned about supernatural belief systems, rituals are symbolic, repeated actions that connect people and reinforce shared values. So when they gather at Warrior Falls in that one specific scene, it's not just about a fight, it's a structured cultural event where all tribes can come together to witness and validate process. and validate the process, sorry. And what is really important is that before the fight, Black Panther, whoever has the powers of Black Panther, those powers are actually stripped away, and that creates this sense of fairness and equality, which reinforces this idea that the outcome is based on tradition, not just strength or supernatural advantage. And because of that, the ritual follows long-standing cultural rules that resist that the result becomes socially accepted even if people don't personally agree with the outcome. So that's why Killmonger is still recognized as a king after defeating T'Challa, because the ritual itself creates this legitimacy because is tied to shared beliefs and symbolic practices. And from an anthropological perspective, this shows that authority isn't just about who has power, it's about whether the power is supported by cultural systems that make it feel rightful. Very interesting. So it's almost like a ritual that is doing more than deciding who is the winner. It's actually convincing everyone that this winner actually is beneficial to lead. He deserves to lead. They deserve to lead. So going off of that, we have the second question, which comes from Reddit user Major_Stones. They ask, if rituals are what makes leadership legitimate, does that mean people have to accept the ruler even if they disagree with them?
Well, in my belief,
Sky?
well, in my belief, I think in Wakanda, the expectation is kind of yeah, because the ritual represents something bigger than the individual opinion. So, since all the tribes come together to witness the fight, it becomes a shared experience, and that creates pressure to accept the outcome, even if people don't exactly agree with the person who wins. So, it's less about whether you personally support the ruler, and I think more about representing the system that everyone believes in. And so, in resulting, that's what keeps the society stable. Because if people started rejecting the ritual, then the whole structure of relationship and leadership would kind of fall apart.
Yeah, and that actually ties back to what we were trying to say earlier, because rituals don't just represent beliefs, they are also what creates social order and unity within a society. On top of that, we have another question that kind of goes really more specific. Maybe Hallie, you have a little answer to this. But
Yeah.
the question is, why do Wakandan tribes accept Killmonger as king, even though many of them clearly disagree with them? I know we did touch on it a little bit, but maybe you have a more specific answer.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that the scene really shows kind of how powerful the ritual is because even though people are uncomfortable with Killmonger, they still accept him as king. So like the scene at Warrior Falls, all the tribes are physically there watching it happen, so they can't really deny the outcome, but since the ritual is tied to their traditions and their beliefs, going against it would almost be like rejecting their entire culture, which would not be very good. So even if they disagree with Killmonger personally and just as a person, they don't think he's a good person, they can still recognize his authority because he won in the way their society says is valid. They went through a valid ritual, and therefore he has to be king.
And honestly, both of those questions connected right back to the original idea. The ritual combat isn't just about choosing a king, it's about creating a system where authority is recognized because it's rooted in shared cultural and symbolic meaning, which is very interesting. So even when people disagree with the ritual itself maintains stability because it gives everyone a common framework for understanding who has the right to lead.
So, overall, looking at Black Panther through an anthropological perspective really shows how deeply culture shapes a society, especially when it comes to identity and how communities understand themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that with gender and sexuality as well, we can see how the film both reflects and also challenges traditional roles, especially in Western societies, while keeping those ideas still grounded in cultural expectations.
And even though something like food, sorry, and even though something like food, and even through something like food, we see how everyday practices can reflect larger cultural values and help reinforce social structure within a society.
Exactly, Mikhail. When we connect that back to race and ethnicity, it really highlights how culture, history, and global context all play a very major role on shaping those identities.
And I think the same goes for the ritual aspect too. It kind of shows how belief systems and traditions can influence how power and authority are even understood and accepted.
Exactly. So when we bring all of these perspectives together, it becomes clear that they aren't just saying that these systems don't work separately. They all actually connect to shape how the society actually functions.
And that's what makes looking at a film like this through an anthropological viewpoint so interesting. It helps you see those deeper meanings beyond just the storyline.
Right, and I think it turns something we'd normally just watch for entertainment purposes into something that we can actually analyze and learn from.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much all that we have for you guys today. So we just want to say thank you guys so much for listening to this Vibecast, as we call it, as it is obviously just this one-time academic production for our sociology class here at Acadia, Introduction to Cultural and Anthropology 1113 in the winter term of 2026. Unless you guys have anything else that you guys would like to say, you guys to speak now.
I think you pretty much covered it. Just thank you, and I think it's important to analyze films like this in different lenses and not just looking at it in like an entertainment perspective. I think it can teach a lot about societies and culture.
Yeah, exactly. All what I had, Hallie just covered it, so I just want to say thank you for listening and thank you for watching.
Yes, so thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys maybe learned a little bit of some things from our cultural anthropological lenses and all of that. And we just want to say thank you guys so much. And thank you to our amazing director, Professor Hoya Morchetti. We want to say thank you so much for allowing us to have this opportunity. It was really fun to do this group work, and thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Signing off.
Vibecast.